Wildfires and Wine. This is Robert Manni, host of Guys Radio, and this week my special guests are Bonny and Matt Meyer, purveyors of the Meyer Family Cellars up in Northern California. We're going to talk about the wildfires, we're going to talk about wine. It all starts Wednesday evening at 8 p.m. Pacific Time on KCAA Radio here in Southern California, 102.3, 106.5 FM, 1050 AM. The podcast drops tomorrow along with my YouTube. Guys Radio, thanks for your support.
It's Guy Radio. Here's your host, Robert Manni.
Welcome to Guys Radio. This is your host, Robert Manni, welcoming you to the show where men and women can be at their best and everyone wins. Guys Radio. On Guys Radio, we bring you guests who tell us about their stories, their journeys, their insights to help you get informed, be inspired, be empowered to think, to feel, and hopefully act. That's what we do on Guys Radio. We try to add value to your day as best we can by bringing in information that you might not have thought about. We get you to consider new ways of thinking, maybe look beyond that fence in your backyard, because you know, when you follow mainstream media, and we all check in, you got to see what's happening. You got to find out what the big stories are. But when you're trained to and tethered to mainstream media for everything, you're just going to get the same stuff over and over again. I think it's really important that we provide information and guests who have insights and can share their stories and their journeys and some things that have happened to them in their life that have really made a difference and can help make a difference in your life and your way of thinking. Because as we know, we create our lives every second of the day, and most of it is through our thoughts and our perspectives, and that's the only thing that's real right now. So, Guys Radio, we've got a great show for you today. I've got two guests. We've got Bonny and Matt Meyers from the Meyer Family Cellars, one of the preeminent wineries in California, and we all know the wineries have been hit by fires. So I wanted to support Bonny and Matt on the show. Bonny's been on in the past. She discussed her memoir called Perfectly Paired, about her and her husband, Justin Meyer, who is one of the icons of California winemaking, and in particular the Cabernet Sauvignons that they make. But I want to bring her and her son Matt on the show to talk about what's going on with the fires, so everybody's aware and has the real information from people who actually live up there and work up there. And also, so we have more information so we can support those wineries. I know when things get better, it's a good way to support the wineries is to go visit them. Obviously, right now is not the best time with the fires, but we really need to support our wineries and also buy local, buy California wines, buy U.S. wines, and do the best to help our economy and help our winemakers. It's a tough business, wine business. There's so much information, there's so much competition. The margins aren't that great. It takes a long time and a lot of expertise to make a really good wine. So if you're going to buy some wine, consider buying local, buy California, Oregon, wherever, New York State, wherever it's local for you, and support U.S. wines. So that's what we're going to talk about on our show today. We'll get to that in a couple of minutes. Let's just talk about what's happening. I don't want to get deep into the election because it's just there's too much stuff going on. And I think canceling this debate this week, probably a good thing, because we're not sure about the president's actual health. He says one thing, but we don't have a lot of support for that. So we really can't be too sure. He didn't want to do the virtual debate. The last time it went face-to-face with him and Joe Biden, it was kind of it was a mess, let's face it. It was a total mess, and it wasn't fun, and I think people were really turned off that this is what our politics have been lowered to. It was just very not informative in terms of what's going on with the issues, but I think we saw a little bit about the characters of the individual running for this office. So I'm kind of glad they canceled the second debate, and we'll see what happens from there. Last week we had the vice presidential debate. There was some more interruptions, and I think there was a lot of openings that things that issues that could have been talked about and elaborated on instead of kind of just one-upmanship and finger pointing at each other. So it's just sad, the state of politics in this country now. And I hope after this election, I hope there's a clear-cut winner one way or the other, and then we can move on. But it's not looking that way right now. So, as I've said in the past, do your best not to get triggered by everything that's going on. Don't be glued to the mainstream media and everything about the election. And just take a step back. Be happy you're alive. If you have your health, be happy you have good health. Maintain good practices to protect your health and the health of others, and just be respectful and be a good person. And I think that goes a long way, particularly in times like now. It seems like a little thing, but actually everybody who does positive things is there's a ripple effect, and it really helps out the global consciousness, if you will. What else is happening? Well, here I am in Southern California. I've been here about a year, and I've noticed that we're getting into the fall. And as an East Coast guy, I'm always used to the leaves turning. It gets cooler, and sometimes it rains a little bit later in the year, like in November and stuff. But here in Southern California, one thing I've noticed is you get these weather patterns, and they last from like 5 to 10 days. And here in San Diego, it's been, wow, we've had the same weather for a couple of months straight. It just doesn't rain. And I asked a couple of people, I said, because I couldn't remember, when's the last time it's rained out here? And I asked a few people who live here, and they looked at me and they're like, I don't know either. It doesn't rain here. And that's just hilarious in a way, but we need some rain now and then. And last winter it rained about, I don't know, maybe about 6 to 10 times tops, but that's it. So we've got another heat wave coming through. It's mid-October yet. We've got another heat wave coming through in Southern California. So if you like dry, hot weather, this is the place to be. I got to tell you, and it doesn't change. Where you live in New York, where I lived for many years, it rains every week, and sometimes, or it seems like it rains every week. And then when it rains, it could rain like 2 or 3 days. And here, it's like I look at the 10-day forecast, and it's sunny, partly cloudy, 80 every day. A heat wave now and then, but that's about it. So I assume it'll change again going forward. But just if you like warm, dry weather, this is the place to be. So anyhow, Guys Radio, hope you enjoy our show. We're going to get at it right now with our special guests, Bonny and Matt Meyer from the Meyer Family Cellars.
It's Guy Radio.
It's Guys Radio. Very special guests here on Guys Radio. We've got Bonny Meyer and Matt Meyer. And Bonny, you may know, was on my show a few months ago, and we talked about the wonderful Bonny Vineyards of the Justin Winery. And today we're going to talk about what's going on with the fires. We're going to talk about wines, viticulture, and helping our listeners, everybody, figure out what decisions they need to make. How do you make decisions about choosing a wine in a restaurant, the difference between different types of wines, and also buying wines at retail, because here in Southern California, there's so much wine available. And it's really, the decisions are a lot of decisions to be made because there's a lot of information to kind of fold through. So let me tell you a little bit about Bonny. She's the principal of Meyer Family Enterprises. It's an investment company dedicated to the regeneration of the planet and society. She sold Silver Oak Cellars in 2001, and I can tell you, I had 2 bottles of the Bonny Vineyard Silver Oak Cabernet, and it was heaven in a glass. They were the best domestic wines I've ever had by far. She's now a partner in the Meyer Family Cellars, a winery run by her son Matt, who's here, and her daughter-in-law Karen. And she's the author of the upcoming memoir. Well, actually, the book is out, Perfectly Paired, and that's what we talked about last time, the love affair behind Silver Oak Cellars. So welcome to Guys Radio, Bonny and Matt Myers.
Thank you very much, Robert. And I want to say the second, one of those bottles of wine that you had that was the best ever, Matt made. So one was from Silver Oak at Bonny's Vineyard, and then Matt has carried on that tradition by making those wines. So very proud of him.
Oh, fantastic. Well, the 2005 was incredible, and I'm not sure the second one made them in 2015.
15.
They were both wonderful. So congratulations to both of you. And I know Justin Meyer is an icon in the wine industry, and particularly with the Sauvignon Sauvignon Blancs, the
Cabernet.
Cabernet Sauvignons, and just an amazing winemaker. And his book is called Plain Talk About Fine Wine, Justin Meyer. And it's got really great information, whether you're a consumer or you want to get into the wine business. It's just very well done. But let's start right at the beginning. You guys are both up there in wine country. What is going on with the fires?
A lot of fire, a lot of smoke, bottom line, and more fire than we've ever seen. Actually, the last, since 2017, there was a major fire. Earlier this year, there was a major fire, and now again. And I've not seen fire like that in the Napa Valley. There was one many years ago. Golly, when was it? In the 1980, maybe 81, when a pyromaniac and a strong wind started a number of fires along the Silverado Trail. But these are more climate related. The hot high winds and the hot weather, and it's scary and a big loss for so many people.
Now, have any of your wineries or properties been impacted by this?
Well, everybody's been impacted just due to the fact that you can't get away from the smoke. And but I would say that no, nothing of ours has burned. Mm-hmm. Other wineries in the Napa Valley obviously have not been so lucky this year. This year, to me, is very different than the last few years. We've had smoke in 17 and 18 from fires that were relatively close by. But almost the entire vintage had been harvested before those fires began. So they really didn't impact the industry nearly as much as this one did, because the first fire started so much earlier in the season.
Okay. And how about like right now, what's going on? Because every day we see more and more about it on the news. I mean, down here, I'm in San Diego, and it was very, very smoky down here for about 10 days or so, where you couldn't go out and really do too much outside. Of course, you couldn't, go out for a run or play tennis or anything like that. How are things going now? Because people seem to, mistakenly think that, oh, maybe the fires are, under control because we're not getting all the smoke here right now. But that's not necessarily the case, is it?
No, there's certain communities that are much more affected than others. Up in the hills above the Napa Valley, the town of Angwin, and to a certain extent, the town of Calistoga. I mean, the local fire departments have done a wonderful job of sending out releases, and you can certainly watch those in line, and they'll give an in-depth idea of exactly what's happening. But they were very concerned over the last 2 days because we have had a red flag warning. They were predicting very high winds, and I'm hoping, kind of what I've been hearing is that it wasn't as windy as they were worried about. I shouldn't really speak out of turn, but mm-hmm. Just from we're on the phone constantly talking to our neighbors and trying to get an idea, just like everybody else, of what's going on. Yeah.
Now, how is this when getting into the actual wines? How does the ash and how does it affect this year's harvest, and then how does it affect things long term in terms of the vines and the vintages and everything that's going on out there in the fields?
So it should not have any real effect long term. I mean, it's almost impossible to burn grapevine. They have done a good job of going out there and photographing vines that actually did burn, but that's very, very rare. Vines are actually one of the reasons why things are not worse in the Napa Valley. Is vines are a fantastic fire break. They just don't tend to burn. They have a lot of water in them. So that's been a blessing. And to that extent, like for the most part, you haven't seen many vineyards lost. There have been quite a few structures lost, and obviously that's going to take some time to rebuild. But there should not, outside of that, there shouldn't be any long-term effect. As for how it affects this year's crop, the good news is that any wines that were picked before anything started were perfectly fine. And to a large extent, folks are saying that they believe the white wine production this year should be perfectly fine. They're still very hopeful about that. And any reds that came in, early picks, especially Pinot Noirs, and a few of the other varieties that are coming in early, should not be affected. Now, the way that it affected grapes that are still out there is essentially there's these compounds that will float through the air and the smoke, and they'll land on the outside of the grape, and that's not a problem, but eventually there's certain classes of compounds, creosols and syringols and guayaquils, that can absorb into the skin of the grape. But what we think is it tends to stay on the skin, and so you can actually still make even a rosé wine out of a red grape if you don't press too hard, because you're leaving those smoke tank characters behind. The real concern is the red wines that normally stay on the skins for 2 weeks during fermentation. And if you've got any of those compounds in the skins, they eventually get into the wine.
How about the vineyards themselves? I mean, does the ash, does that get cleaned off? Do you just leave it? What do you do to the vineyards to keep them in good shape?
Well, sometimes people, like I do, I incorporate ashes from my fireplace into my garden.
Mm-hmm.
So the ash isn't a problem for the soil. It is carbon.
Okay.
And so it's one way that carbon can actually be sequestered by vineyards and other, yeah.
Now, if God forbid, the vineyards, the actual, the vines were burned, do the winemakers keep extra seed or anything? Is there any type of backup, or once they go, that's it? Do you keep a set of small vines somewhere? Is there some type of storehouse or something? I know I'm just throwing this out here, just wondering.
Yeah, no, of course. So basically, we don't grow any grapevines from seed.
Okay.
Because the moment that you grow something from seed, you've got a totally different variety. So, for example, Cabernet Sauvignon, there's nurseries kind of all throughout California in unaffected areas, and they would take cuttings off of the branches of those vines. You plunk that in the ground, you got another Cabernet Sauvignon vine.
Got it.
So, yeah, replanting would not be an issue.
And then how long, if that was the case, how long does it take for those replants to become viable?
You get a little bit of crop in the third year typically, but only about 10 to 20% normal harvest. And you get up to a full harvest usually by the sixth year. So it takes about 6 years for vineyards to become fully mature.
Okay. Let's get into some wines and your background, Matt. I know your dad's an icon in the industry. How did you kind of get into the business, and what was your background in viticulture? What do you like about it?
Well, I mean, for me, it was an easy business to get into because, like, I don't know, my parents were in the wine industry, so I don't know what it's like if your parents are tax accountants. Like, maybe you don't want to hang out at work, but when your parents have a winery and you go there, like, everybody's in sort of a good mood. Like, people working in the cellar, people working in the tasting room. There's just kind of a nice vibe around the whole place, and especially, growing up in the Napa Valley in the 70s and the 80s. It was a little bit of a simpler time, and there was definitely a very large camaraderie that my mom could probably speak more to than I could. I mean, it was a small, kind of close-knit group of folks, and everybody was there to help each other. So it was pretty easy industry to get into. And so to learn viticulture, well, obviously, you really learn the practical things at the winery, but then my master's is in viticulture from UC Davis. And so you kind of learn the theory and the chemistry at the university.
Now, as just a consumer and somebody who enjoys good wines, location, it seems like location. I'm seeing Paso Robles all the time, and Carneros, obviously, for some of the Chardonnays. And how important is location, or is it overemphasized?
No, it's hugely important. I mean, obviously, your weather is going to be a little bit different from one year to the next, but in California, we have it pretty easy. Our summers, generally speaking, are very predictable, and usually the same appellations will produce the same quality year after year. Probably the easiest example I can give you is the Napa Valley. So the Napa Valley, you mentioned Carneros, where they're growing Chardonnay. Well, it's right next to the bay. So it's the coldest spot. So they're also producing a lot of Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir, Chardonnay love the cold. You go a little bit north in the valley, it gets a little warmer. That's where Merlot likes it. You go a little bit north from there, you get into the Oakville-Rutherford district. That's where all of your Cabernet Sauvignon is going to be. And then you go the farthest north in the valley to Calistoga, which is sort of the hot end of the valley because you're the farthest away from the bay. And that's where you grow your Zinfandel because it likes it hot. And so absolutely, like you wouldn't be growing Zinfandel in Carneros, and you wouldn't be growing Pinot Noir in Calistoga.
Now, I see Paso Robles, I mentioned that earlier, all over the place since I've been out in Southern California. And I was talking to a friend of mine. He runs a wine store in New Jersey. And I said, we were just having a chat. And Paso Robles, what is the magic, or is there a magic about that? Why do we see it? Why is it so ubiquitous now? I don't recall seeing that like 10 years ago, but I'm not that deep into the, super deep wine knowledge for myself as a customer.
Well, I think, no, I have a lot of friends that graduated from Davis and are now working down in Paso. And certainly it was an up and coming region, and now it's really made a name for itself. I think a lot of that is proximity to the Southern California market, right? And, people love to go visit a place and, kind of meet people and understand the area a little bit better. So I think that really has helped out that region a lot as well.
Yeah, let me speak to that a little bit. Just in general, Robert, every region needs to find itself. And I remember many years ago when I went up to Oregon to a big event there, and this I think was in the maybe late 70s, early 80s, and the wines in general were horrible because people there hadn't quite figured out what they did best, or how to manage the vineyard, and how to face the vineyard, what varieties to plant. And the winemakers hadn't quite figured out exactly the best way to handle them. But then over time, each area, as it first comes online, is really awkward, like a kind of a young kid. But as over time, it really comes into its own as viticulturists and enologists really begin to figure out what it does best. And then you'll see an area really focus and become more famous for a particular variety or two.
Now, your wineries are famous for their Cabernet Sauvignons. Why do you think that is? And why is Cab kind of the king of the reds in California?
Cab is king of the reds everywhere in the world.
Okay.
And so so I just remembered Justin was famous for a quote. I remember sitting next to him when he said this for the first time. He said, the obligation of every wine is to be red.
I love it.
And so that was his personal preference, but he also strongly believed that Cabernet Sauvignon was the best grape for Napa and Alexander Valleys, which is where he was focusing. Now, Matt, our winery is up near Boonville. And so all of his Cabernets come from Oakville, which is considered the best place in the country probably for Cabernet. But then he also makes some Syrah and some other varieties up there, Sauvignon Blanc, other things.
Okay, Guys Radio, my special guests are Bonny and Matt Meyer, fabulous viticulturists, winemakers, and real experts on the area. And I want to get into, if it's okay with you two, is just for our listeners, just to get into the different types of wine and what people should look for. So let me start with cabs, obviously. When somebody's going out, and let's say it's retail, what should they be looking for? What should be the considerations they're making when determining which Cabernet Sauvignon to buy?
A pretty label. Justin's book talks a lot about this, Plain Talk About Fine Wine. And, he really cautions people really encourages people to really experiment and figure out what they really like. And then if you're going to, once you've found something that you really enjoy, and maybe you drink 2 or 3 or 4 wines that have been recommended by a wine writer of some kind, and you say, okay, this is what Cabernet should taste like, or this is the style of Cabernet that I like. Like personally, I don't like the high alcohol, really jammy Cabernets. So I'm definitely going to steer away from that. Once you know what you like, and you can describe it a little bit to the person at the restaurant or the someone in the wine shop, once you can say, I like a Cabernet like this one, then they can point you to other ones that are similar.
Okay, let me ask you a dumb question. What is a claret? Because I noticed on a bottle in the store the other day, it was a Coppola and it said claret. And I'm like, I'm not sure what claret is. And then I was reading on it, and I was reading up on it. It's like it's a cab. And what makes that different? What is a claret?
It can be a Cabernet. It's not, claret is not a varietal name, and Christian Brothers used to make a claret, and it was a combination of Cabernet-like grapes. So it tends to be a blend. Is that your understanding, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, so you don't see that very often in the U.S. You can see that a lot more in European wines because they tend to label wines by blends rather than in the U.S. We're almost entirely varietal driven. I mean, you are seeing a few more red blends than you used to at the moment, but for the most part, we're varietal driven.
Let's go ahead, Matt.
Well, what I was going to say, just to your earlier question about how do you choose wine. Because it can be extremely intimidating. And when in my dad's book, he devoted a lot of time to trying to get people to, overcome that fear. And I would say, become friends with your local, wine shops. And if they recommend wines to you and you come back the next time, you say, you know what, I really didn't like that, and here's why. Or, hey, I really like that, and here's why. And you develop a relationship with that person, they can be your guide. Absolutely, 100% believe in that. And it's really hard to do that in a restaurant because, usually, unless you go to the same restaurant all the time, I even have trouble choosing wines in restaurants. In fact, I usually make my wife do it. She knows more about different things around the world than me.
Now, what's the difference between a California cab and a French cab, if you will?
Well, yeah, a French cab is sort of a modern thing. Like typically people would just refer to them as Bordeaux, but Bordeaux are almost always blends. They're hardly ever 100% Cabernet Sauvignon. And most of the Cabernet in the United States is mostly Cabernet Sauvignon, if not 100% Cabernet Sauvignon. So I would say that's the first difference. The second difference is we actually went to visit my brother's living in Bordeaux, and when we were able to still travel, we went to visit him last year. And I learned that I could learn nothing about viticulture in Bordeaux because our weather pattern is dry all summer long. And he said there hasn't been a week that he's been there for 2 years where it hasn't rained. It's just such an incredibly different, cooler climate over there compared to us.
And there's the third difference, and that is that the French, which makes sense, tend to use French oak, and there are wineries, notable wineries like Silver Oak and Matt and Meyer Family Cellars that use American oak, and those two oaks have different characters. So that also gives a different character to those wines. So it's really three differences.
The blends in the States, I'm finding, and strictly speaking on behalf of some of our listeners at least, I'm kind of feeling my way around. Like in the $20 range, I've gotten a Conundrum I thought was decent for the price, but blends seems to be a real crapshoot, if you will, in America. Is that true? And if so, why is that?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And I think part of it is that, some people do make amazing blends and they're kind of dedicated to it. And other people, they're like, well, I'm having trouble selling my Syrah and trouble selling my Zinfandel, so I'm just going to blend that together with some other stuff and see how it turns out. So you have to, there again, you just have to know who the producer is, and really at the end of the day, I think all wine appreciation is taste and see. It's kind of scratch and sniff, right? And I always say, there's these wine writers that make a living rating wines on a 100-point scale, which I think is crazy, because my scale has always been, I open it, I taste it, and I either like it, I really like it, or I'm not putting it in my mouth again. That's it. I got a 3-point scale.
All right. Guys Radio, I have Matt and Bonny Meyer from the Meyer Family Cellars, and also formerly of Silver Oak Wineries. We're talking about wines today, and I'm just Joe Blow consumer, so I'm going to ask some more dumb questions here. So when looking for a Pinot Noir, what should our listeners kind of look for? Because as we talked about, since it's kind of a new type of wine in some ways, and it's there's been a lot planted, is it again just trial and error, or are there certain things on the label that people can look for? Oh, it's from this area, it should be good, because now I see Oregon's got some Pinot Noirs, and obviously there's certain locations that are better than others. Can you help us out with that, Matt?
Same thing. I would just taste and see. So like when it comes to Oregon Pinot Noir, I would say taste 3 or 4 of them. And, I think people fit very well into 2 categories. They either really like Oregon Pinot Noir or they really don't like Oregon Pinot Noir. It's a very different flavor profile than Californian. And some people gravitate towards it, some don't. It's usually a little more earthy. It's a little more funky. It has some kind of darker notes. And, it's kind of like, I don't know, choose a food product, any food product. Some people like their steak medium rare, and some of it like cooked with something on top of it.
How about, I'm thinking of consumers now. My wife likes Sauvignon Blancs from New Zealand. I don't. They're very grapefruity and grassy, and it's a specific taste profile. Whereas the Sauvignon Blancs from California, I find, are much more even and more balanced. Help me out with that. Anything else you can add to that? Am I on the right track there, or what?
Yeah, no, I did one harvest. My wife actually spent 3 years down in New Zealand, and it took her about 12 years before she would relent to making a Sauvignon Blanc here in California, because she made so much of it down there. She just got sick of it. And they do a great job, but what you have to understand about New Zealand is they get their weather from Antarctica. And so it's cold, and all grape varieties, whether it's Sauvignon Blanc or Cabernet, wherever, they have a flavor kind of ripening index. And so, sort of that grapefruit that you're talking about, that's what you get in those colder appellations. And then it develops into more tropical, fruit salady notes and floral notes as you get into a riper region. And so for the most part, that's just a heat index thing.
Okay. Everybody loves Chardonnay. I find Chardonnay's great, not great necessarily with entrees, eating food, but great drinking. And then there's some that are buttery and some have more tannin. And what are some of the things that consumers should look for to determine what might fit their palate? Is there a region?
I mean, there is to a certain extent. So I would say that we get our Chardonnay from a pretty cool region. And the colder the region, the more acid you're going to have in the wine. So the more kind of refreshing it is. Whereas, if you get too hot for a Chardonnay, you lose some of that, and it almost becomes very viscous in the mouth.
What causes the buttery taste?
The buttery taste is a byproduct of malolactic fermentation. There you get a little technical, but basically malic acid, it occurs in wine and it's not stable. So we add a bacteria to it to convert the malic acid to lactic acid. And one of the byproducts of the bacteria is something called, it ends up smelling like buttered popcorn. But not all of the bacteria that you use for that malolactic process cause that. And so it's sort of up to the winemaker if they want their wine to smell like butter or not. So it depends on which. No, it is. It's a conscious choice that people do, and a lot of American consumers love the butter, and so a lot of winemakers use bacteria that create a lot of that.
That's good to know. How about tannins? What are tannins, and how do they impact the flavor of a Chardonnay or any type of wine?
Well, and let me say one thing about the how to choose a Chardonnay, and it's the same as what Matt's been talking about. that if you decide if you like a buttery Chardonnay or a clean, more balanced Chardonnay, more fresh Chardonnay. And I like the former. And so if I am unfamiliar, going to a restaurant, I don't recognize anything on the list. That's what I asked for. I said, I want a crisper, cleaner Chardonnay, please. And so it's really between those, that's a really good distinction that consumers can make.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let me flip back to tannins. So it's a term that a lot of people hear, but I think for the lay consumer, they may not know exactly what is a tannin and why is it important and how does it impact the taste of a wine.
I mean, the easiest way I could probably explain it is that there is tannin in coffee. And so both tannin in wine and tannin in coffee, that's that thing that sort of grabs onto your tongue and gives sort of a drying sensation to it. And it really is, tannins in no way affect the smell of a wine. It's all just about how it hits your tongue.
All right. How about oak then? Same question.
Oak has tannin, so it can affect the taste that way. But oak also imparts aromas that you're going to smell. And the best way I can describe that is oak is the spice rack of winemaking. Grapes do not develop spice aromas by themselves. So if you get coffee or tobacco or vanilla or any of those sorts of aromas, that's all coming from the oak.
Okay. I'm seeing a lot. I was in Costco the other day, and there's two guys, and they were looking at the wines. And I find that you can find some good deals on some good wines there, and sometimes yes, sometimes no. But anyhow, there's these two guys, and one guy picked up a bottle of it was a red, and he said, "Oh, you got to get this," and it was bourbon. Had kind of a bourbon over, like bourbon barrels, and because so many dudes are into bourbon now, I was wondering, is that just a marketing technique or what? What do you think about the actual barrels themselves?
Well, I mean, at one point, putting wine of any type into barrel was a marketing technique, right? Everything starts somewhere. But yes, the bourbon barrels are barrels that they actually aged bourbon in, and then they put wine in. And so at that point in time, you're not getting any of those spice aromas from that oak, because they've already been taken out by the bourbon, right? And so the only aromas that you're getting out are directly from the bourbon, because some of the bourbon will kind of seep into the oak, and then that will infuse into the wine. Okay. And so yeah, if you like bourbon, absolutely try it out.
Okay. The big box retailers, they have some private labels wines. What is your thoughts? Obviously, everyone's different, but can you find a decent private label wine out there?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's like everything else; it's hit and miss.
Right.
Some private labels, they've really worked with the wineries and they really care about quality. And some of them, they just know they can get juice for that the winery rejected for really cheap, and they're not too worried about the quality of the products. They just want to hit a low price point. So it just depends on who you're dealing with.
Okay. A couple more questions. We've got Matt and Bonny Meyer of the Meyer Family Cellars, experts here, educating me and hopefully getting some information for our listeners. Prosecco, such a hot category now. It was kind of nowhere for a long time, and now everybody's into Prosecco. What do you make of that?
I like Prosecco.
Easy to drink. It's fun. Why not? It's like that. But once you discover that you like that, you can also kind of go out from there and go to your wine shop and say, what else do you have that has these same kind of flavor profile?
A cava or whatever. Yeah. Temperature. A long time ago, I was the brand manager for Martini and Rossi Asti Spumante back in New York City, and it was the number one selling sparkling wine at the time. And the reason was because it was sweet, and everybody liked it ice cold. And I find that people seem to drink white wines way too cold, and red wines, some need to be room temperature, but it doesn't hurt necessarily, in my opinion, if they're just a tad cool, not cold. But it seems like temperature is one of these things that Americans have there. It's like sweet or not sweet. Everybody's got their own idea on that. What are your thoughts about temperatures for reds, whites, and any particulars that you want to talk about.
When I go to a restaurant, I ask for my water without ice.
Me too.
So we all have our preferences. Cold actually diminishes and sweetness in a wine. If it's got flaws, the colder it is and the sweeter it is, it will cover up the flaws. Mm-hmm. And so some winemakers, producers use that to their advantage. But I would say it's partly a personal preference, but generally wines are served colder. White wines are served colder than reds, and reds I like cellar temperature, which is, as you described it, cool but not cold. But if it's a hot day and I have ice in my sangria, mm-hmm. or I might even put ice in a red wine if it's a really hot day and I feel like having red wine. So there are no rules. It's just kind of a general preference.
Matt, we want to add to that, or?
Well, sure. I mean, I would just say that I went to spring training like 2 years ago, mm-hmm. and went to grab a coffee before I went to the game, and I just ordered, a cappuccino, and I realized out of the 20 people in the line, I was the only person that didn't order nice coffee. And I've noticed that every time I travel out of state to sell wine, whether it's Alabama or any place that's hot, yeah, they really like to serve their white wines cold. But here in California, I don't see that as much. People are more than happy to serve them pretty close to room temperature.
Okay, Matt and Bonny Meyer from the Meyer Family Cellars. Great interview. Let's get back to the fires just for a second before I let you go. What do people really need to know about this? Is there anything that our listeners can do to be supportive, help out? I mean, my understanding is the lands, a lot of the lands where these forest fires have happened are federal lands, yet we hear some criticism about lack of land management, et cetera. What are your thoughts on all this, and what can people do to be supportive of what's going on, and our firefighters, of course?
The fires in Napa and Sonoma counties are in the forested area, but not necessarily national forest. There's some state forests there. What they can do to help is if people want to donate to help people out who have lost their homes and all, the best place to donate is to the respective community foundation. So the Napa Community Foundation is absolutely the best place to donate funds to. And okay. I think Sonoma has a community foundation too. I don't know the name of it, but I would say the same there.
I'd say the best way you can help is come visit. Because in 2017, I kid you not, like when we had the fires, and it was awful, right? But it was awful for 2-3 weeks. And then we had people canceling reservations for next year. And we're like, guys, don't come when there's a fire. It's not fun. But the moment the smoke's out, I know Napa's desperate for visitors these days. Between problems with COVID and the fires, we need people to come.
And speaking of that, Matt is hosting. We're hosting at the winery an event tomorrow. So I'm going to be going up there along with a few other people who are releasing the 2015 Bonnie's Vineyard, which you had a preview.
Oh.
Yeah, and it's gonna be super low key. Normally we get 200-300 people, and we've limited it to about 40, I think, just to kind of spread everyone out. But it should, you got to have some fun, even when times are tough.
Okay, just as a shout out for your the work that you guys are doing in your wineries, why don't you tell everybody the proper names of the wineries, where they're located, and how people can visit?
Yeah, absolutely. It's Meyer Cellars. We're located the tasting room's located in the Anderson Valley. But you can always find our wines on the website, which is www.mfcellars.com, as in meyerfamilycellars.com.
Okay, great. Bonnie, Matt, thank you so much. Forgive me for stumbling over some of my questions, because I'm just like some guy who goes into the wine shop, and I'm many times just overwhelmed by the amount of decisions I need to make and the qualifications to buy the right wine at the right price. But you guys have done an amazing job in making super quality, super ultra premium wines, and also just being very nice and generous with your time to help educate me and our listeners. So thank you so much both for being on Guys Radio.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Robert.
Thanks.
Robert Manni's The Guy's Guide to Love is a fast-paced tale of flawed men and savvy women competing for love, sex, power, and money in the city where they play for keeps. It's the men's successor to Sex and the City. The Guy's Guide to Love is a sexy romp through the fast-moving, high-stakes world of Madison Avenue. Available now on Amazon and wherever books are sold. It's Guy's Guy Radio.
Okay, that was a very informative discussion with Bonny and Matt Meyer of the Meyer Family Cellars up in Yorkville and Mendocino, California. And they are really wonderful people. They're very kind, generous with their time. They did send me a couple of bottles of the wonderful Cabernets from the Silver Oak, the Bonny Vineyard. And I'm so pleased that they came on the show again. Matt wasn't on last time, and he runs the winery now, the day-to-day operations. And I really wanted to devote the time to just sharing some education, if you will, for myself and for all our listeners about wines and what we need to know and what's important and how do you kind of build a palate for wine and what you should look for. And I guess what we learned was that with wines, there's so many choices, and it could be overwhelming, all the information out there and all the appellations, but it's really about finding wines you like and then asking some of the quote-unquote experts to guide you to similar wines. So, as Matt said, you go to the wine store. If you have a wine that you liked, write down what type it was, what was the brand, and say, hey, I enjoyed this, and this is kind of my price point. Do you have anything else that's kind of like that? And then you can build 4 or 5 different wines that fit that. So when you're out, you can look for discounts or whatever, but at least you start to build a repertoire around your palate as to what you like, and you can branch out for there. I would suggest that you kind of keep a little booklet on that, jot down or put on your iPhone or whatever device you use, the types of wines you like, the price points, where you got them, maybe a couple of tasting notes if you're interested. If you're not, if you just want to like pick out what you like when you like, it is a good idea to recall what was the wine that you liked, why you liked it, and then when you talk to a salesperson at one of these wine shops, they can point you to similar wines, and maybe you'll spend a little more, maybe even spend a little less, or find something on deal. So they were really terrific people, and I'm very appreciative that they came on the show, and hopefully you guys out there learned as much as I did about wine, because as you can see, I like to drink wine, but I really am not an expert in any way, shape, or form. I have a lot of friends who know much more about wines than I do. When I go out on business dinners, it's always somebody who considers themselves the expert, and they grab the wine list, and I usually just listen and follow along. But I know what I like. My wife has an excellent palate, and now over time, I've started to develop my palate where I can differentiate the different flavors, what I like, what I don't like, the different notes I like. And it's an art, and it's a science, and it's a lot of fun if you do drink alcohol, and if you like wine. It can be a very fun hobby. Of course, you don't want to drink too much. You want to keep it real. But having a glass of wine with dinner can be an enjoyable thing if that's something you choose to do and you don't have an issue with alcohol. Okay, what else did we learn? I think we learned that it's a good idea right now to support our California wine vintners, because there's been so much fire and so much trouble up in the wine country, and it's good to support American and local brands. I'm out here in Southern California now. I'm originally from New York, New Jersey area, but it's good to support the California wines. And if you're in California, you can get, the prices are competitive out here, and you can really have the opportunity to sample lots of different wines here. So that's great. I think we also learned that, kind of Cabs are king for the reds and Chardonnay for the whites, but there's lots of other great wines that are out there. If you like a Sauvignon Blanc, Petite Syrah, Pinot Noir, which, as we talked about, is kind of a tricky one because it became so popular so quickly based on the movie Sideways, Rex Pickett's novel that became a really fun movie. But it takes time and skill to make a really good Pinot Noir. And I've gotten some really good ones, and I've gotten some that were like, what? So I've found at least that Cabernet Sauvignons are a little more predictable, a little more consistent. And you do have to lay them down for a while. I didn't realize that you could lay cabs down for like 10, 20 years, whatever. But good to learn, and I hope you learned a lot also. So here we are on Guys Guys Radio. We're here every Wednesday evening at 8 p.m. Pacific Time on KCAA Radio in Southern California. The podcast and our YouTube drops every Thursday. And also there's a replay broadcast of our radio show every Sunday on KCAA at 6 p.m. Pacific Time. It's 102.3, 106.5 FM, 1050 AM, Guys Guys Radio. You can stream it, you can download, you can listen whenever you want. Guys Guys Radio. We have so many outlets now. It's incredible. Let me just give you a quick laundry list. Spotify, iHeart, Google Podcasts, Google Play, Mixcloud, Listen Notes, Radio Public, Podbeam, Castbox, Podtail, Pod Paradise, TuneIn, Hubhopper, Player.fm, Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Podchaser. My YouTube is, you just go Robert Manni, look me up, and we call it Guys Guys TV. We have about 60 shows or so on there right now, and it's growing, and we'll be moving to all video at some point in the near future. But you can listen if you consume your podcast through YouTube. We're there. If you want to see two talking heads, we're going to provide them for you at some point in the very near future. But right now we have all the audio on our YouTube as well as all these other outlets. So Guys Guys Radio every Wednesday night on traditional terrestrial radio, and then Thursday the pod drops worldwide. We are now in the top 100 in the UK, in Great Britain, in Australia, and Canada for our category, and it's doing great, and we've got more and more listeners. So thank you for your support. You can also catch all information about anything Guys Guy at my website, robertmanni, MANNI.com. We've got 3 free chapters of my novel, which is a source material for everything Guys Guys. It's called The Guys Guys Guide to Love, and it's a fun rom-com about 2 guys in advertising competing for love, sex, power, and money in New York City, the city where they play for keeps. It's been called the man's successor to Sex and the City by Dan Wakefield, the iconic 20th century author. And it's a lot of fun. We've got great reviews. You can pick up the book on Amazon or wherever you buy your books. We've also got over 300 blog posts about life, love, the pursuit of happiness, pretty much anything that has to do with a man's life. And I hope you enjoy those. I've gotten a lot of great responses on that, and it's all free. And so we're doing a lot of fun things with Guys Guys. So I hope you can join us. Every week we're here Wednesday night. We've got a lot of great guests coming up. I want to thank my team, Ryan Gilpatrick and Chris Marcello. They just do a wonderful job in terms of just so much support, so much great thinking. Chris is doing production now. She's doing a wonderful job, and I thank you listeners out there, and I hope you'll join us next week. So until then, have a great week, and as I always like to say, guys, finish first.